I wasn't searching for Tartaria when I came across the dark day of 1780, May 19th, to be precise, when the sky turned black across New England and parts of eastern Canada. Not overcast, not dim. Black. Noon became midnight. Candles were lit at midday. Livestock returned to their barns, believing night had arrived. The darkness was that total, that absolute, that Connecticut's legislature adjourned because members genuinely couldn't see one another across the chamber. The official story: forest fires, smoke from distant blazes, carried by unusual weather patterns. Clean, tidy, self-contained. And for most people, that's where the story stops. But the more I dug into first-hand accounts, the more that explanation started to fracture. Because this wasn't limited to New England. Reports of strange sky phenomena, darkened days, blood-red moons, ash falling from clear air, show up across multiple continents in the late 1700s, 1780, 1783, 1784, all within just a few years, and all curiously lining up with something else: Tartaria vanishing from maps. Let's be clear about what we're told happened. Forest fires, common enough in pre-industrial North America, produced enough smoke to darken the sky for hundreds of miles. That smoke hung around most of a day, then faded. A natural event, unusual perhaps, but explainable. Except the darkness wasn't gradual. Witnesses described it arriving like a curtain being drawn. Timothy Dwight, later president of Yale, wrote that the darkness was as strange in its appearance as in its depth: not drifting smoke, not gathering clouds, but a sudden advancing wall of black. And here's the oddest part: the darkness had a reddish edge. Multiple accounts mention a copper or brass tint to the air where blackness met remaining light. That night's moon, when it rose, looked blood-red through the haze. Forest fire smoke doesn't act this way. I know, I've stood under wildfire skies. I've watched them go orange, then brown, seen ash fall like snow. But this was different. The accounts described not just darkness, but a quality of darkness that resists simple atmospheric explanation. Samuel Williams, a Harvard professor who documented the event, noted that the darkness stretched far beyond any reasonable estimate of where fires were burning. He calculated the affected area at over 150,000 square miles. That's not a fire. That's a regional catastrophe. So why forest fires? Why that explanation specifically? And why, when I started pulling at this thread, did I find that 1780 sits at the center of a constellation of other impossibilities? Here's where the pattern starts to show. 1776, American independence declared. A new nation, a new story, a new beginning. Fresh maps needed, fresh history required. 1780, the dark day, the sky goes black. And here's what you won't find in most history books. 1780 marks a turning point in cartography. The maps change, not in the usual way, not gradual corrections or updated surveys or refined borders. No. Something else happens. The name Tartary begins to disappear. Not fast, not all at once, but systematically, deliberately, across multiple publishing houses in multiple countries. A name that had appeared on maps for centuries starts to fade. By 1820, it's nearly gone. By 1850, it's as if it never existed. Tartary, or Tartaria, depending on the source, had been on European maps since the medieval period, labeling vast territories across Central and Northern Asia. The name persisted through the Age of Exploration, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment. It was there on Dutch maps, French maps, British maps, Russian maps. And then, in the decades after 1776 and 1780, it begins to be erased. Replaced with what? With more accurate designations, we're told. Proper national and regional names, territories of the Russian Empire, the Qing dynasty, the various khanates and tribal regions of Central Asia. The official explanation falls apart here, because this isn't how 18th century cartographic knowledge worked. You didn't simply erase a name used for centuries without documentation, without transition, without explanation. Mapmakers were careful. They cited their sources. They explained their corrections. But for Tartary, nothing. The name just fades. If you're watching this, you've probably heard whispers of Tartaria. If this is your first encounter, let me know in the comments what brought you here. This goes deeper than most realize. What follows the dark day, and what follows Tartaria's erasure from maps, is what I've come to think of as the inheritance period, roughly 1780 to 1850. And this is where things become impossible to ignore. This is when massive, technologically sophisticated buildings start appearing across the world, all sharing suspiciously similar architectural features. Neoclassical revival, we're told. A return to Greek and Roman ideals spreading from Europe to the Americas, to Russia, to parts of Asia, all within a few decades. But what if they didn't just appear? What if they weren't just built? What if they were already there? How did San Francisco, recovering from the gold rush, build world-class Beaux-Arts palaces? How did Melbourne, a colonial outpost, put up exhibition halls to rival European cathedrals? How did Chicago erect an entire exposition city in 2 years, using 19th-century technology? The official answer: progress, the Industrial Revolution, colonial ambition, human ingenuity. But that answer forces us to ignore some uncomfortable facts. There are no adequate construction records for most of these buildings. Photographs exist of finished structures, almost none exist of the building process. No documentation of the required labor forces. No supply chain records for millions of tons of stone. No contemporary accounts questioning how these structures appeared so quickly. What we have instead are dedication plaques, opening ceremonies, official histories written decades later, and a suspicious uniformity in the story. These buildings represent the triumph of this nation or that empire, built by these or those unnamed groups of workers, completed on schedule despite all odds. The pattern suggests something else, not construction, but inheritance. What if these buildings weren't built in the 1800s? What if they were already there? What if the plaques, the official histories, the dedication ceremonies were simply reattributions, a new civilization claiming the infrastructure of an old one? Let me know if you've noticed these patterns in your own city. The evidence is everywhere once you start looking. Don't forget to subscribe. This investigation continues. So let me propose an alternative timeline. Pre-1780, a global, or near-global, civilization exists. Tartaria, or whatever they called themselves. Advanced enough to build the classical architecture we see worldwide. Extensive enough to appear on every map. Organized enough to maintain infrastructure across continents. 1780 to 1785, catastrophic collapse. Whether internal war, natural disaster, or something else, destruction on a scale that darkens skies globally. The population is killed, displaced, or scattered. The infrastructure remains. 1785 to 1820, the inheritance period. Surviving or arriving populations, Russian expansion, European colonialism, American westward movement, Chinese territorial consolidation, claim the empty cities, reattribute the buildings, create foundation myths. We built this in record time with primitive tools becomes the standard narrative. 1820 to 1900, historical revision. Encyclopedias rewritten, maps redrawn, academic consensus manufactured. Tartaria becomes a geographic term, not a civilization. The architectural inheritance becomes evidence of rapid industrial progress, not continuity with a previous culture. 1900 present, the narrative solidifies. Anyone questioning it is marginalized. The coordination problem, how did global architecture appear simultaneously across unconnected cultures, is ignored. The missing construction documentation is never investigated. The abrupt historical transitions are never examined. And the dark day? Just a curious atmospheric phenomenon. Forest fires. Nothing more. Except it explains too much. The timeline. The architecture. The silence. The coordination. It explains why there are no adequate records of how these buildings were actually constructed, because they weren't. They were found. It explains the uniformity of style across supposedly separate cultures, because they inherited from the same source. It explains the rush to attribute, to claim, to establish official narratives, because empty cities don't belong to anyone, and they belong to everyone. And it explains the dark day, not as random smoke, but as the last visible evidence of a civilization's final hours, the atmospheric signature of annihilation. The sky went black because a world was ending. And when the smoke cleared, we were told it was always ours. Which brings us back to the dark day. May 19, 1780. The sky turns black, not just in New England. Reports from Europe, from Russia, from the Far East describe similar phenomena in the years around the date. 1783 sees the Loki eruption in Iceland, creating what climatologists call a dry fog across Europe. 1783 to 1784, the Great Frost. 1784, widespread crop failures. 1785 to 1786, strange atmospheric phenomena, blood moons, unseasonable cold. The official explanation fragments into multiple natural disasters, forest fires, volcanic eruptions, unusual weather patterns, all coincidentally clustered in a 5-year window. But what if it was one event? What if the dark day wasn't smoke from forest fires, but atmospheric debris from something much larger? What if the dry fog of 1783 wasn't volcanic ash, but particulate matter from mass destruction? What if the years without summer weren't random climate aberrations, but the nuclear winter-like aftermath of catastrophe, not a single eruption, not random fires, but a civilization-ending cataclysm? The kind of event that would explain why Tartaria vanishes from maps after 1780. The kind of event that would leave behind empty cities waiting to be re-inhabited. The kind of event that would demand a new historical narrative to explain the architectural inheritance. Here's the strangest part. If Tartaria was a major civilization, if these buildings were built by a culture that spanned continents, where did they go? Not gradually, not through slow decline and conquest, but abruptly, completely. Maps from 1770 show Tartary. Maps from 1820 show Russia, China, and European colonial possessions. The transition happens within a generation. No documented wars, no recorded mass migrations, no contemporary accounts of refugees, of cultural integration, of conquest and absorption. Just replacement. And here's what that requires: the complete destruction or displacement of a population massive enough to build global infrastructure. The erasure of their language, their records, their cultural memory. The reattribution of their architecture to new powers. The rewriting of maps, encyclopedias, histories. The coordination of this narrative across competing empires, Russian, British, French, American, Chinese, all agreeing on the same story: Tartary was never a real civilization, just a geographic term. Nothing to investigate. The silence is deafening. No academic investigation into where the people went. No archaeological interest in excavating Tartarian sites. No linguistic analysis of possible surviving language. No genetic studies of population continuity. Instead, consensus. Immediate, total, global consensus that Tartaria was never important. This raises a simple but critical question: why? Why would competing empires agree to erase a civilization from history? What benefit does this serve? What are they hiding? Unless the truth is worse than we imagine. Let's return to the dark day with fresh eyes. The official explanation, forest fires, serves a specific purpose. It provides a natural, localized, non-threatening answer to an atmospheric phenomenon. It requires no further investigation. It implies no larger pattern. It's comfortable, safe. But the evidence suggests something much larger. Contemporary accounts describe the darkness as unnatural. Describe the air as having a peculiar quality. Describe sounds, deep rumbling, distant thunder with no storm. Describe animal behavior not just as a response to darkness, but as a response to something primally wrong. What if the dark day wasn't about hiding forest fires, but about hiding the atmospheric effects of large-scale destruction? Consider, what would a collapsing civilization look like from the sky? Cities burning, infrastructure demolishing, perhaps weaponry we don't acknowledge existed. The atmospheric signature would be massive, prolonged, visible across continents, if the civilization was large enough. And what better way to hide that signature than to attribute it to natural causes? Fires, volcanoes, weather, all unpredictable, all unremarkable, all requiring no investigation into human causation. The dark day wasn't evidence of Tartaria's existence. It was evidence of Tartaria's annihilation. And the atmospheric explanation, the smoke, the fog, the natural disasters, wasn't wrong. It was incomplete. A partial truth designed to obscure the full picture. Yes, there was atmospheric disturbance, but not from random natural causes. From coordinated destruction on a scale we're not supposed to imagine was possible in 1780. I can't prove this. Not definitively. The evidence is circumstantial, fragmented, suppressed. Official history has an answer for everything, even if those answers require us to believe in impossible coincidences and miraculous construction timelines. But I can ask questions. Why did Tartaria disappear from maps so abruptly? Why is there no documented transition period? Where did the population go? Why is there no archaeological interest in answering these questions? Why do buildings from San Francisco to St. Petersburg share identical architectural details, despite supposedly being built by different cultures with no communication? Why are there so few construction photographs, and why do the ones that exist often contradict the official timeline? Why did atmospheric phenomena cluster so dramatically in the 1780s? Why was the public response to the Dark Day, an event that terrified an entire region, so muted, so quickly dismissed? Why does official history insist on natural explanations that require coincidence after coincidence after coincidence? And why, this is the question that haunts me, why is there such resistance to investigating these questions, such hostility to the idea that our official timeline might be incomplete? The deeper I go, the more the official narrative looks like a construction itself. Not a lie exactly, but a careful arrangement of partial truths, a story designed to satisfy without revealing. The Dark Day happened. That's documented. Tartaria appears on maps, then vanishes. That's documented. Global architecture shares impossible uniformity. That's photographed, measured, standing right in front of us. What's not documented is the connection. The why. The how. And maybe that's intentional. I started this investigation looking for an explanation of a dark sky. I found evidence of a dark century, a period when something ended and something else began. When cities changed hands, when history was rewritten, when questions stopped being asked. Was Tartaria a unified empire, a confederation, a technological civilization, a cultural sphere? I don't know. The evidence has been too thoroughly scrubbed. Did it collapse in the 1780s? Did the Dark Day mark its final hours? Did atmospheric catastrophe erase it while European empires divided the spoils? Maybe. The timeline fits. The silence fits. The inheritance fits. Or maybe I'm seeing patterns where none exist. Maybe forest fires really did darken the sky. Maybe rapid construction really was possible. Maybe Tartaria really was just a vague geographic term. Maybe. But I can't shake the feeling that we're living in inherited cities, walking through buildings we didn't build, following maps redrawn to hide older borders. And I can't stop wondering what knowledge was lost, what technology, what understanding of the world. The architecture remains. Stone doesn't lie. Classical facades, impossible domes, global coordination, it's all still standing, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The Dark Day was May 19, 1780. The sky went black. And when it cleared, a civilization was gone. If you know what I'm talking about, if you've seen these buildings, noticed these patterns, felt the wrongness in the official timeline, you're not alone. Leave a comment. Share your city's anomalies. This investigation is just beginning. Because somewhere in the smoke and silence, there's a truth we weren't supposed to find. And truth doesn't stay buried forever. It just waits for the right questions. What are we not being told about 1780? What happened to Tartaria? And who benefits from our forgetting?